going on, guys? I'm Joe, and today we're here to talk about the newest Star Wars movie that's out and the first in the set of anthology films that Lucasfilm is trying out, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. I'm just going to call it Rogue One because I actually think that's a kind of a stupid title. Whatever. I apologize for the lateness of this video. I wanted to see this movie a second time just to make sure that my opinion wasn't all because of hype. I was pretty excited to see this movie, as you could probably tell from Facebook posts and also from my reaction to one of the trailers when the Olympics was happening. And I also want to put this out there. I'm going to go into some spoilers because I feel like I can't really talk about this movie without going into specific details about the movie. And it's been a couple days since the movie came out, so I feel like more than enough people have seen it by now, so you've been warned. There's going to be spoilers. So basically the plot of this movie is the opening crawl that we saw in A New Hope. A group of rebels, led by Jyn Erso, are sent on a mission to steal the architectural plans to the Death Star and deliver it to the Rebel Alliance so they could figure out how to destroy it. But thanks to this movie, there's actually a lot more going underneath the surface than what we were told in the opening crawl in that movie. We're following the main character, Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones. Her father, Galen Erso, played by Mads Mikkelsen, turns out to be the architect of the Death Star, and he's drawn back into finishing the construction of the Death Star by Imperial Director Orson Krennic against his will. And because of certain things that happen when Orson Krennic comes back to recruit him back into building the Death Star, Jyn Erso's mother is killed, and she runs away and is raised by Saul Guerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker. And then she's recruited by the Rebel Alliance to find her father and figure out what the Death Star's capabilities are. And I've said this before in other videos, but I am a big Star Wars fan ever since I was a little kid. And when this was announced, I was very curious to see how they were going to play this out. And when those trailers were released, I was even more impressed. And so far, out of all the anthology films that have been announced, this is the only one that had my curiosity. I'm not really sure about the Han Solo spinoff still, but we'll see how that goes. Boba Fett, that's a long ways away, so who knows. And this movie is also directed by Gareth Edwards, who did the Godzilla movie from 2014, and while I did have a good time with that movie, if I remember correctly, I wasn't that in love with it. But if he has a big budget, Gareth Edwards shows his potential as a filmmaker when it comes to big blockbuster action. And that sense of scale and size that you saw with Godzilla, he shows it in this movie with the Death Star. That's probably one of the biggest compliments I can give this movie. The aesthetic of the picture and the scope of this movie is awesome. You feel the size of the Death Star whenever you see this thing. The whole look and feel of Rogue One feels just like the original trilogy. It's got grit. The whole universe feels used and out of date, if that makes any sense. Especially with the way the Stormtrooper's armor looks in some scenes. Like particularly when Jyn Erso was broken out of imprisonment. There's this one Stormtrooper just kind of sitting around like this, like, ugh. His armor is basically all dirtied up. And that's another thing. It captures that ground level feel. And I didn't really say it before since I started talking about what I liked about Rogue One, but where do I stand on Rogue One? Overall, this movie's getting a positive reception. It's like an 80-something% on Rotten Tomatoes last time I checked. A lot of people are saying that it's good, but not great. And other people are saying that it's not good at all, or some people are saying that it's awful. It's like the worst Star Wars movie ever. As expected, Star Wars fans are quite a rabid bunch, if you ask me. After seeing it a second time a few hours ago, my opinion is more or less the same. It's good, but it does have some give and take. And trust me, guys, I really, really wanted this to be a good movie. I didn't want this to suck. I didn't want this to fail. I really wanted to like this movie, and I did, with the first and the third act at least. But the second act, that's where I think the movie really suffers the most. Now, I mentioned the aesthetics and the look and the feel of the whole thing, which is all well and good. And most of the effects in here, practical and CGI, look perfect. They look absolutely outstanding, save for a couple of CGI shots with certain returning characters. But since I mentioned characters, let's talk about some of the main characters. This is something that a lot of people are having problems with, that they're bland and they don't have any character development, there's no character arcs, and they're not that interesting, and that they're boring and yada yada yada. My stance is, I think the characters are fine. They're not great. They're not as memorable as people like Rey, Finn, or Kylo Ren. But I'd say probably the strongest character that has given the most development is Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones, who does a fairly good job as this character in certain scenes when she has to convey emotion about her father, Galen. And I've heard some people say that she's pretty bland, looks like she's bored, but one of my friends on Facebook pointed this out in his non-spoiler thoughts. She's someone who doesn't really have exactly a parental figure in her life to go home to, so someone like that would probably feel stoic and find it kind of hard to express her emotions outwardly to certain people. And I can kind of see what he's saying. Not really groundbreaking, but it's identifiable, and I could see what he was trying to go for by expressing that view. And like I said, I think she's given probably the most amount of characterization, because she starts off losing her mother and running away after her father's taken away by the Empire. Then you get a hint of a backstory with her and Saul Gerrera, being raised by him and being brought into his band of militants, who then later kicked her out because of her connection with her father to the Empire, and they saw her as a potential liability, since she would be made a target by the Empire if they knew about her. So she was left to fend for herself by Saw Gerrera. And then when she's recruited by the rebellion to find her father, and she sees that message from her father, she then decides to find him and tell the rebellion about what he did to the Death Star, which, let's talk about that. Galen Erso, who I think is played pretty well by Mads Mikkelsen. I don't know the guy that well in other movies. I know he's the main villain in Casino Royale, but he does a pretty good job in this one scene where you see a hologram of him talking to Jyn Erso in a recorded message, talking about how much he regretted not being there for her, how much he loves her, and especially when he talks about what he does to the Death Star. And this is something that fans have complained about for years. It turns out he is the one who built the exhaust port on purpose, in a way that the Empire would never find it, which is what Luke fired into in Episode 4, A New Hope. And when I first saw that, my dad and I looked at each other and went, oh my god, now it makes sense. And when you watch Episode 4, New Hope with this knowledge, it actually makes it even better. In that respect, that is a humongous compliment. And also in that scene, not just on Mads Mikkelsen's part, but on Felicity Jones's part, she actually lets that wall down and she starts to break down in tears, feeling heartbroken over hearing her father, in a way, talk to her after so long. It's probably the most emotional moment in the entire movie, as far as character depth is concerned. Like I said, she's given them probably the most amount of characterization, but it could have been handled better with the second act, as I've said. But with other characters like Captain Cassian Andor, played by Diego Luna, he's fine, but there's really not much to his character outside of him being ordered to kill Galen Erso by the rebellion, and then him telling Jyn that you're not the only one who's lost everything. I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. Some of us just decided to do something about it. But that's really it. You don't really know that much else about him. I think if they gave him a little more to say, like, my family was killed right in front of me by stormtroopers, and I was left to die there, or something like that, I think maybe that would have made it a little bit better. And then with other characters, like Donnie Yen's character, Chirrut Imwe, who's actually a really cool character, since he's like a samurai. We never really saw that in Star Wars before, and even if there's not much else to his character, I'm never going to forget this line, I am one with the Force is with me. I am one with the Force is with me. Never going to forget that. Never will. And his other friend, I don't know the character's name. He's fine too, and I like the sense of friendship that's portrayed among both actors. I just wish there was a little bit more as to why that came to be. But as far as a standout character goes, like Jyn Erso, as I said, given the most characterization. Donnie Yen's pretty cool character, but also K2SO, that's something a lot of people are really losing their minds over. He is hilarious. Alan Tudyk, he's perfect. It's not the first time he's played a robot before. Come on. What am I doing? Do you want to know the percentage of her using that weapon against you? It's high. Really high. And as far as the villain goes, Orson Krennic, played by Bill Mendelsohn, who some of you may know was in Dark Knight Rises as John Daggett, who tries to take over Bruce Wayne's company. He's a fine Imperial villain. He's got that classic, "You rebel scum! What are you, deaf? Round up the garrison!" He's pretty entertaining in certain scenes, and especially when he gets all riled up. He doesn't do a whole lot, though, which I was a little bit bummed by, because in the trailers, this glare he has looks like he could kill you just by looking at you. In the movie, though, he's a pretty entertaining villain, not the best villain, though. And there's a whole bunch of other returning characters in here that you may or may not recognize from the other movies, like Mon Mothma, the founder of the Rebel Alliance, General Don Donna, Red Leader, this is Base 1. Keep half your group out of range for the next run. Jimmy Smits as Bail Organa returns, and I thought that was a really cool addition and a nice connection between prequel and original trilogy. Now, speaking of returning characters, Grand Moff Tarkin is in this movie, and I kind of figured he would be, but when he showed up, it was pretty exciting to see him come back, because you see him from behind, and you see his reflection in the window as he's looking at the Death Star. But then, when he turns around, it's actually a full motion capture effect, and looks exactly like Peter Cushing, who sadly passed away a number of years ago. While I didn't mind seeing him in this movie, because I think it made sense for him to have a substantial part in the movie since he is a high-ranking official on the Death Star, the CGI looks a little bit iffy in some spots. Like when he first turns around, it looks fine, but then depending on the lighting, like if it's a shadow or if the light's shining on him, looks a little off. Some people are having problems with it, saying that it's basically disrespecting his memory. I personally don't feel that way, but I could see why people are saying that. I didn't mind him being in this movie because I felt it would make sense within the timeline since this is right before A New Hope, but I think they could have fixed the CGI on the actor's face. Then again, CGIing a human face, from what I understand, that's pretty hard to do. And another returning character, let's get to it, Darth Vader. I personally was not expecting Darth Vader to have a huge part in this movie. I was expecting him to have a role that was very similar to the Emperor in Empire Strikes Back. Minimal, but effective. And I got exactly what I wanted. I think his role fits, and it adds more awesomeness to the mythology of this character. When he first shows up in that bacta tank, when you see him from behind without his costume on, just remember, he's a damaged person underneath that costume. And when you see the shadow cast on the wall when he's about to talk to Orson Krennic, I got goosebumps. And when he walked right through that smoke, oh my god, I was freaking out. It was so cool. And it was awesome to hear James Earl Jones' voice again. James Earl Jones' voice still fits that character, even today. I don't really think you could have chosen anyone else to voice that character. It's perfect. And I like throughout this whole scene, Orson Krennic is just shaking by talking to Vader because he knows what this guy can do. And if it were me, I would not even be there. I'd be further away dealing with the other Imperial officers, but I'll be saving that for my review of the original movie in a few months' time. But when he chokes Orson Krennic and he says, "Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, director." That is so Darth Vader. Love that line. And I'm going to talk about that one scene at the end, but let's talk about the action. The action in this movie is pretty freaking awesome, mostly in the third act. With the space battle and the land battle on the beach, that is probably the best battle sequence, or at least one of the best. That space battle, it might actually rival the battle above Endor in Return of the Jedi, because unfortunately we didn't really see a space battle in Force Awakens. But in the third act of Rogue One, it's probably the best space battle that we've seen in a long time, since Battle of Endor. And I thought it was really bizarre, but also really cool to see certain pilots come back from the original, which actually turned out to be stock footage from A New Hope, and they incorporated it into this movie, Gold Leader and Red Leader. This is Gold Leader standing by. This is Red Leader. I'm sitting there like this. Oh my god! And that's another thing. The fan service, some people are probably going to have problems with it. I personally didn't mind it in the slightest. With movies like Star Wars, they're going to have fan service. Like I said, with Grand Moff Tarkin in this timeline, I think it fits. And the battle on the beach I think is pretty awesome too. It almost kind of reminded me of Saving Private Ryan, in the sense where they're fighting on the beach and they're pinned down beside this bunker door. You felt the intensity in this battle scene right here, like with the soldiers pinned down, not knowing if they're going to get out of this alive. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it, is that it's pretty awesome to see. Oh yeah, and also there's a couple of things I just forgot to mention. Forrest Whitaker's fine, but his character was a little bizarre for my liking. And also leads into this one scene with the pilot that he interrogates, Bodhi, whatever his name is. He's delivering a message from Galen Erso. There's a scene where he has Bodhi interrogated by this really weird squid-looking creature. That scene did not need to be in the movie. That was too bizarre. If you had one of Saw Gerrera's guys like beating him up and torturing him or whatever, maybe that would have been fine. But anyway, back to the action. Another action bit that I really liked was Donnie Yen beating up the stormtroopers, of course, and also some of the street fighting between Jyn Erso and the stormtroopers along with Captain Andor. And also the battle in the rain with the X-Wings and the Y-Wings flying in, blowing up the Imperial stronghold. I thought that was pretty cool too. And before I get to the ending, another thing I liked, they tried to explore how the Rebel Alliance is not exactly squeaky clean. They actually force Captain Andor to do certain things, or they try to order him to do certain things that he clearly does not feel comfortable with. And it's easy to look at the Rebel Alliance as like the wholesome kind of good guys since they are fighting the Empire, and that's true and all. Yeah, the Empire's bad and they're controlling everything, and the rebels, they have to try to get the Republic back, but then they do certain things where you go, come on, that's kind of a morally reprehensible thing to do. But considering that this is war, people are going to do unforgivable stuff. That's just the way it is. I know I'm kind of jumping around back and forth, but this is a really difficult movie to talk about because while I don't hate the movie, I think there's a lot to like about it. But with all the talk about the reshoots that happened this year, I can't help but wonder, I don't think it was studio interference that was the problem. I feel like maybe certain people dropped out and maybe Lucasfilm was kind of in a hurry, so they tried to make it work as best as they could. I don't know what exactly happened behind the scenes, but I think it shows in the second act that something happened while this movie was being made. And yeah, I don't really know how to describe it, but I don't hate the movie. I think it's pretty good in certain moments, and especially in the first and third act. But the second act, I think, is where the movie really suffers. It gets kind of boring in like trying to get to this part and this part, where I think you could have had a little more character moments and character building. I think that would have made the movie a lot better. And while I wasn't that broken up when the characters eventually died in the end, the moment that did kind of get me on the second viewing especially was when Donnie Yen's character dies and his other friend is holding him in his arms and he ends up saying, "I'm one with the Force is with me." Because earlier in the movie, he doesn't exactly understand or believe in the Force. But after seeing his friend, Chirrut, now I remember his name, going out to put himself in danger, I think in that respect it makes sense. But again, I just wish we could have gotten a little more of character development with these two. And I know I keep going back to it, but I really wish that we could have gotten more character development from these other guys. The actors are really putting their all into it. They're not doing bad jobs at all in my estimation. In fact, if I had to choose between this and a movie like Attack of the Clones, I think I'd rather watch this one, because one thing that these characters have that all the other characters in the prequels, save for Ewan McGregor, don't have: personality and human emotions. I mean, Ewan McGregor's character has human emotions, at least the last two, but the other characters, not so much. In this movie, the characters actually have personality, and they do try to give them character development. Not to say that George Lucas didn't try in the prequels, but in this one it feels a little bit more realistic, just a little bit more in my book. So if I had to choose, I'd rather watch Rogue One over the prequel trilogy, personally. And also the musical score by Michael Giacchino. Originally, this was composed by Alexander Desplat, who for some reason dropped out in the middle of production. Again, I don't know what happened during the production of this movie, but Michael Giacchino's score, I wasn't really feeling it in this one. It wasn't bad. Sometimes I actually liked it, especially when it made certain callbacks to John Williams' original cues, even at the end credits, but overall, not his best. And right before I talk about the ending, another part of the action that I thought was pretty cool was when this other ship called a Hammerhead comes in and pushes one Star Destroyer into another Star Destroyer, crashing it right through the planetary shield gate. That I thought was pretty cool and a really creative way of destroying a Death Star, because usually in the Rogue Squadron games, which I had a lot of fun playing with as a kid, you have to destroy the two spheres on top of the Star Destroyer and the dome underneath the ship, and then you got to attack the command deck. Just have the other one slice the other up. Yeah, that I thought was pretty cool. And I also like how they came up with the name Rogue One, because they were essentially going rogue on their own without anybody's permission. When the pilot says it's Rogue One. Made sense, I guess. And when the guy on the other side of the radio said, "There is no Rogue One," well, there is now. And soon there's going to be a Rogue Squadron, which, in the game, and also which is what Luke is the leader of in Empire Strikes Back. In that respect, I think it makes sense, because they're honoring the memory of the people who gave their lives from Rogue One, stealing the plans of the Death Star. But let's talk about the ending. Darth Vader arrives on another Star Destroyer as most of the fleet gets away. Certain Rebel ships are left behind after that Star Destroyer comes in. Darth Vader says, "Prepare a boarding party." He takes off in his shuttle, and certain Rebel soldiers are planning for extraction with the plans of the Death Star. And all of a sudden, the hallway that they're in goes black. They all set up, waiting for an attack. And real quick, I heard rumors that there was going to be a scene of Darth Vader using his lightsaber, and after the beach battle scene, I thought for a while that we weren't going to get that scene. And I had this feeling of, oh man, you're really not going to give us that scene? Come on, man. But then, when that hallway went dark, and then you heard the breathing, that's when I thought, wait a second. Then the lightsaber came on, and my jaw had never hit the floor so hard when he starts slaughtering all those rebel soldiers and they're shooting at him and he grabs one. Oh my god. Oh, I love that scene. Oh man. Now I know why Kylo Ren is such a fanboy of his grandpa. And why Vader was the most feared person in the galaxy. And this one rebel soldier, he's banging on the window door. Help us! Help us! But me, I'm like, dude, you are not getting out of this alive. And as Vader's getting closer to him, he puts his hand through the door and says, go, go, take it, take it! Yeah, just take the plans and get the hell out of there. The other rebels get the plans. They're running for their lives into this hallway, and all of a sudden this hangar door opens up, and it's the ship from the original movie, the Tantive 4, the blockade runner, and it takes off as Vader's looking on. And this one captain, I think it's Captain Antilles, he goes into this room and talks to this one person who turns out to be Princess Leia. You see her from behind, and when I saw her from behind, I went, no, no. We just got this message from the band of rebels who were on that planet. It's like, what do you think it is? And she turns around and says, hope. And then the ship takes off. I know what I'm going to be doing soon. I'm going to probably be popping in A New Hope again, because we know where they're going to end up. But when she turned around and you saw her face, that was so bizarre. But yet, looked damn near perfect in my book. Didn't last that long like they did on Governor Tarkin. And that CGI work that they did, impressive. Most impressive. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about Rogue One. I don't hate the movie. In fact, I think it's a fine movie, personally. I don't know. It's a hard movie to talk about, and I don't really know what else I can add to the table that hasn't already been said. I think the first act and the third act are good, especially that third act, and with those last few minutes also. But the second act, I think, is where the movie suffers. The whole thing with the reshoots, I'm sure people are going to call Lucasfilm blasphemous now, and that they're going to do the same thing with all the upcoming Star Wars movies, like with Episode 8, which I actually read is actually done with their production, at least filming it at least. So I highly doubt that Kathleen Kennedy's going to do this all the time with the upcoming movies. But I don't know what happened behind the scenes. Like, maybe they weren't really feeling how this movie was going to turn out to begin with, so they wanted to try to change certain things. And I get it, you know, you want to try to make the best movie possible, and maybe if they felt like the movie they were making before wasn't working, then I can understand that. But I don't know. This is a really hard movie to talk about. It's not a bad movie. It's not awful. I'm definitely going to be picking this up on Blu-ray and adding it to my collection, but it's not the best Star Wars movie I've seen. Could have been a lot better. If I had to grade it, I'd probably give it a B. I said on Twitter that I gave it a B+. I actually think I'm going to give it a B on this one. Again, not awful, but not great either. So, those are my thoughts on Rogue One. What did you guys think of Rogue One? Did you love it? Like it? Hate it? Did you think it was okay? Whatever your thoughts are, comment below and tell me your thoughts on it. I'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you.